In this video, I'm going to go over the basics for how I frame larger pieces and secure my center stones to the frames. The first step for me for building frames is deciding the composition of the piece. I've decided to use this really cool etched garnet as my centerpiece for this project. I find it helps me visualize the piece better if I lay out the composition first. So here I have my etched garnet centerpiece, a small garnet crystal accent, 3 faceted garnets, and then 5 more faceted garnets up at the top. When the piece is finished, this is the approximate layout that I'll be looking for. The materials for my frames are pretty simple, and if you've seen my video on framing smaller pieces, this will probably be pretty familiar. I have about 7 inches of 16 gauge square in dead soft, and here about 10 inches, give or take, of 18 gauge half round in half hard. I probably won't need all of this. This was just a length that I had sitting on my desk. To start, about a third of the way down our 16 gauge, I'm going to bend both sides 90 degrees. That gives me something to secure the back of my bail to later on. Now, keeping in mind that this is the approximate shape that I'll be going for, I want to create something for that stone to sit on, as well as a place to secure all the endings for my accent stones. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a spot for the back right of my main center stone to sit. I'm going to do so by bringing my frame up and around, similar to how I would do for a smaller pendant. Next, on the shorter side, I'm going to bring that out and around to create a swirl for that to sit on. From here, I'm going to bend and shape those swirls so that this stone can fit a little bit more flush inside my frame. In order to do that, I'm going to take the back of that swirl and widen it towards the back, because I know that the top of my stone is thicker than at the bottom. Should enable it to sit a little bit more comfortably inside our frame. Next, I want to take my 18 and secure the endings of the 16 gauge square together. Doesn't take too many times around. Once or twice should do the trick. Just make sure that you take your pliers and flatten it together to make sure it sits nice and flush. From this point is where the process between smaller and larger pieces differs for me. I have a whole network of smaller coils I'm planning to fill the body of this piece, and I need a place to secure them. In order to build a place to cleanly anchor all of the coils and additional settings I'll be adding to this piece, I need to create a grid at the back of my frame. Using my same piece of 18 gauge half round, I can go ahead and connect the groundwork for this grid. As I'm building the piece later, this will give me a nice, clean place to tie off all of my endings. So there I have one anchor point built to the back of the frame. I'm going to go ahead and add one more to this one. For the next anchor point, I'm going to start from the outside, wrapping it around my frame. Bring it back into that same swirl. And then for this last one, I actually want to bring it up to here. Gives me a nice little pocket for the back of my stone to sit in. And it also gives me some places to secure wires to as I build the piece going forward. From here, I have all sorts of angles from which I could approach connecting this stone into the frame. This grid will also give us some really easy ways to secure the stone to the frame without adding too much bulk to the piece. Using about 3 inches of 16 gauge half round that I've bent into this U shape, and our remaining 4 inches of this 18 gauge half round, I can go ahead and secure the stone into the frame from this point. Starting with our 16 gauge, I can feed it between the stone and the 18 gauge piece of gridding wire we used. Over the top of that point in my stone, and again in between the stone and the frame, going ahead from here and securing it to the piece. To do so, I'm just connecting it directly to this 18 gauge that we built. And flattening to make sure that those ties are flush and secure. Ready to connect to the other side. This other end, I'm going to go ahead and bring up into my frame and out along this top right edge. Creates a little bit of tension holding the piece or holding the stone into the frame, just enough for me to be able to secure it with the 18 gauge. For this one, I'm going to feed it between the stone and the frame. And again, wrap it around my frame to start. Down along the edge of the stone, where I can tie it off to our framing 18 gauge. Something to keep in mind as you're securing your stone to your frame is the transparency of the stone. Now this garnet is fairly dark, so this small amount of bulk that sits right behind the stone isn't likely to be visible, even if I was holding the stone up to the light. But if I was using a much more transparent stone, like a quartz crystal for example, I would want to make sure that when I built the frame, as few wires as possible were sitting behind the stone. These anchor points that we've built give us the opportunity to connect elements to the piece without creating much bulk. Something like this double coil looks like it's continuing underneath the stone, but can actually end right underneath it. Leave me a comment below and let me know what you think of this technique. I always value your feedback and I look forward to reading those comments with every video. If you haven't already, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel for more content similar in the future. If you're interested in supporting what I do here on this channel, check out the link to my Patreon in the description of this video. I wanted to give a special thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel: Cheyenne, Janine, Dawn, Susan K, Jin, Earthstar Creations, Susan L, Ben, and Jerry.